Welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by Caliber Mind. Our goal on the RMR is to help marketers move from subject matter experts to strategic business partners. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Mike Burton. Mike, please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, and thanks so much for having me. My name is Mike Burton. I'm a co-founder at Bombora. We're an intent data company. And yeah, I've been there since the beginning, starting to build our data asset with our data co-op, and then kind of working with the industry over the last several years and helping them to adopt intent data. And it's been this kind of wild, crazy ride. So thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think intent is on a lot of people's minds, if not everybody in marketing. So whenever I discuss the podcast with folks, we talk about the tension between sales and marketing. So we're going to touch on how intent can be used to build some credibility. But first, for anyone new out there, why don't we talk a little bit about what intent is?
Yeah, sure. So just broadly, right, the goal of intent data is to understand a particular company's research behavior so that it can signal to users of intent data when a company might be interested in what they sell.
So when we're working with an intent vendor, I just want to understand, initially we get a ton of information and then we learn how to narrow that down. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. And that kind of that curation process might be very different for sales than it is for marketing. And that's one of the things that we help our customers through, right? Let's say an inside salesperson might be looking for a very specific, very strong signal, whereas a marketer might have an appetite for more scale and potentially more kind of a nuanced signal, right? A signal that might relate to a specific pain point or benefit or use case for their product. So yeah, but you are correct in that intent data on its face is vast, and you do have to kind of curate it for your use case and certainly for your products and services.
Right. And that makes sense to me as a marketer because we're dealing with people who are much earlier in the funnel. We're looking for awareness signals, and we're also looking for ways to customize or what's the word I'm looking for? Segment our content according to signals. So how do you see people effectively incorporating intent into their existing strategy?
Yeah, we see it, it's been around for a while, but it's still relatively immature in terms of kind of, there's no one way to do it. And so we reduce it down to, two different ways to think about it, either bottoms up or top down, meaning, I want to start using this data for outbound sales prioritization. So I want to start using it at the bottom of the funnel. And then once I kind of prove efficacy there, and I prove to my organization that, this data is really meaningful and it's helping us get meetings and opportunities that we wouldn't have had otherwise, then the use cases tend to expand up the funnel. And that could be used in marketing automation to alter nurture paths or lead scoring, and then certainly for top of funnel targeting of all kinds.
Yeah, and we use it at Caliber Mind, and where we've seen success is actually two places, like you've been mentioning. So the first is adding it into a holistic scoring model. So identifying the points that are interesting to marketing, incorporating that, and then we actually elevate specific signals so we can put people into different tracks, nurture tracks. And then the sales team, they really leverage it, very, very specific signals, just as you were saying, to put into their outreach tracks on their side. So that really resonates. Let's talk a little bit about using intent in terms of lead scoring or elevating signals to sales. Let's talk about the benefits of a gradual rollout instead of just we changed our lead scoring model or we're sending you these intents and we expect you to act on them. What are the benefits to rolling them out gradually as opposed to just blanket all at once?
Yeah, I think it really depends in a lot of ways. It's funny how much comes down to this, just like the relationship or the psychology between sales and marketing, right? So at some organizations where, let's say, the marketing function, manages the inside sales function, then you don't have to worry so much about it because, the marketing team that has implemented the data has that one-to-one relationship, and the SDRs or BDRs are kind of taking their playbook directly from marketing. But when the sales team either a sales managed SDR function or the AEs themselves that might be doing a lot of outbound, when they're looking to adopt this data that marketing just bought, it is probably advisable to be more thoughtful about how you roll it out. And where we've seen success is marketing teams that find a couple of partners, and that could be one sales manager. It could be just 2 or 3 individual contributors or 2 or 3 SDRs that seem forward leaning and are kind of game for experimentation and proving wins in a smaller setting, getting some meetings on the board or some opportunities on the board and using that as a way to roll it out more broadly to the team. We've seen success with that. The opposite would be just put it in everyone's hands, do one enablement session on what it is and what it means, and walk away. And then check back 2 months later, is like, how's it going? And say, yeah, we're not using it. Almost always, right? We're not using it. So yeah, it's good to get your win or wins before you roll it out too broadly. And that way, you're kind of like building in usage as you do it.
Yeah. That I've seen both sides of those coins. I've walked into organizations where they've just blanket rolled it out. And typically the people who resist are the sales folks who have been doing this for a long time. They have their ideal customer profile in their mind and they know better than anyone else. And then there's also the folks who just are a little bit more negative by nature and they have a couple bad experiences and they say this whole model's garbage. So partnering with a few people and then really celebrating and communicating the successes and refining that model early on. Trust is everything between marketing and sales, right? And if you don't have trust, there's just so much friction.
100%. And the other thing to watch out for is if it's too complicated. We struggle with this. We work on this all the time. Hey, how do we make it easier? How do we make it more intuitive? Because it's like to an inside salesperson, it's just like, okay, I see a bunch of topics and these topics have scores and what does it actually mean? And it opens up this Pandora's box of like, okay, you have to explain to me the data and exactly what it means before I feel comfortable using it. Whereas if you can start small, build some wins, and the data is reduced down to a point that it's not confusing and it's actionable, that puts you in a much better position to succeed. What you don't want to do is have to become an intent data, like deep in the weeds intent data expert to get your salespeople to use it.
Yeah.
There's got to be a happy medium.
And I think that speaks to a couple of things I've seen in my career where people don't always think through what they're optimizing for. So if you're trying to capture somebody who's engaging on your website and downloading content, that's not going to be as useful as somebody who's actually converting into an opportunity, which is more useful than converting into a meeting, right? So, or you're optimizing for who converts into a win and taking common signals there.
Yep.
So I think what you're optimizing for, and then also if you're bringing too many factors in and not seeing if they're really actually correlating to wins, you dilute your score.
For sure.
And I see that all the time, particularly around demographic data, where people are optimizing for data points that they hear from sales or executives are consistently showing up in the buying body when actually that data is missing most of the time, or the missing values are converting at the same rate as the quote unquote good values. So it's really important to dig into your model. And that was nerdier than I intended to get today, but
no, I'm with you. Just continue to, look at your closed won accounts and look at the common attributes they have from all angles. I mean, there's the static stuff like firmographics, fit, industry, et cetera, and the temporal stuff, which is behavior. What did those companies do that led them here? And with intent data and with sales, we can anyone can show them the historical intent trends for their closed won accounts, and to kind of full circle it, that can help you roll it out. To be able to, at least even starting with the 2 or 3 early adopters, to be able to say, hey, look, here's why we're adopting this. We looked at 100 closed won deals, and they all had these 2 big spikes in interest over the 9 months before they bought from us. So we want to test acting when we see those spikes. Right? If you can show them the historical data, it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right. And if the other factors, to your point, are simple, like high fit, firmographic, they've been to our website, nothing, stuff that everybody can get their head around, then usually you can get even the most negative salesperson to say, that just makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it would be kind of, we call it, it would require creative negativity if you can show that level of detail, to not want to use the data.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep it simple, keep it logical, right? Like these things all make sense. And to get really nerdy again, sorry, I think smaller companies, you have to take into consideration your data set. So if you have a small amount of closed won deals, that doesn't mean you can't use intent data, but you may be optimizing for meetings because you have a lot of those. If you don't have a lot of closed won deals, it's really hard to figure out a pattern, right? So I think it's okay to optimize earlier, but as your data set continues to grow, you should be trying to move further and further down in the funnel. The Growth Operations Community is a professional network focused on helping organizations drive business growth. They inspire, lift, and share thought leadership, best practices, and learnings for a profession that is continually transforming and growing. Like those of us at the RMR, Growth Ops believes growth happens when marketing, sales, and customer success align to deliver an excellent customer experience. Visit thegrowthopscommunity.org today to join a community of collaborative professionals. Have you been burned by attribution? Are you tired of fighting with salespeople over target accounts and lead scores? We've all been there. And that's because traditional marketing analytics tools bolt onto your CRM and calculate attribution and engagement scores on the data as it is. And let's face it, most of the time, your CRM data is far from perfect. Caliber Mind is unique because it pulls data from all your sources, not just your CRM, into a data platform. Caliber Mind unifies your information, which means you can attribute dollars to website activity, standard Salesforce campaign activity, and more, without wasting time in spreadsheets. Ditch the spreadsheets and check out a new way to analyze revenue data with Caliber Mind at calibermind.com. Nerdy again, a little geeky, but let's talk a little bit about the security changes we're seeing in the market and how they may or may not impact intent.
Sure.
We were really nervous about Google's announcement around third-party cookies, and it looks like they've pushed that back a couple of years, but Apple, iOS, Firefox, and a few other browsers are really on the leading edge of user privacy. So what are you seeing out there in terms, and how is that impacting or not impacting intent?
Yeah, it's a layered question, obviously. So we could go all day, but yeah, just broadly speaking, the actual collection of the information, depending on how it's collected, and I can speak obviously more intelligently to the way we do it, at least in terms of the third-party cookie going away in a couple of years, the actual collection of the information is unaffected, right? So if you walk through it, and this will be nerdy as well, but if you walk through it, you've got a tag across a publisher's website. Let's say that website is cioinsight.com, mm-hmm. Right? So a user lands on that page. That tag in today's world, even when the cookie goes away, has access to the IP address of that user, which sets in motion this cascade of, okay, making a prediction as to what company that user works for, understanding the content of the page so that you can associate that research behavior with that company, right? All of that is when the cookie goes away, is unaffected. So that's good news. There has been some work done recently by Apple to start down the road of potentially masking IP addresses. Mm-hmm. We think, if that happened, our whole industry, if that happened at scale, the B2B or ABM space would be disrupted. There's just no way around it. Like if IP addresses just get completely masked across all browsers by default, that would be a major shift for our industry. Yeah. And it would have significant impact on ABM at large, not just intent data.
Right.
Even the move by Apple is like a tiny little step in that direction. It's like 12% of the market on their browser, and then it's not by default. Yeah. So a user needs to really care about masking their IP address to go do it. But it is a small step in that direction. So that would be a separate. That is very different than the cookie going away. If that's all helpful.
Yeah, I think it does pay for marketers to really focus on their first party data collection strategy. That doesn't mean gate everything, but I think it does pay to start looking at that because typically when Apple tries something, eventually they get there. And I think it'll be years, but it's definitely something to watch.
For sure. And I think there's a good conversation to have around, okay, what does the world look like post cookie? Because there will be changes there in terms of how this data and other data sets get acted on and targeted. But yeah, the IP address thing, even in that world, even the customer, the end customer is like, they won't see what companies are coming to their site anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like even them focusing on their first party data will become really limited.
Yeah. True. Very true. When it comes to adopting buyer signals between sales and marketing, do you have any other recommendations on best practices you see in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about tips for helping sales adopt the data. If you feel like you can get there and do it that way, we recommend that that's the best way to start.
Mhm.
Just because once you've done it and you have that success in sales, it becomes really easy to start using the data in all of these really creative ways up the funnel, right? Because sales is bought in, the organization is bought in. We have meetings and we have meetings and opportunities and revenue. So it's like then you can start doing really fun, cool stuff, right? Like we're, starting to work with customers about assessing their pipeline,
Mhm.
right? Using intent data as an overlay to their pipeline so that they can start to understand deal health, or campaign messaging, or kind of campaign planning, right? So on a quarterly or biannual basis, looking at intent data trends in the macro to
Mhm.
understand what campaigns they should be running and what content they should be creating for those campaigns, right? So these are like these more kind of admittedly fluffier but kind of like next level use cases for the data. And if you don't have like the whole organization high-fiving around how awesome the data is, it's really hard to get into like the full potential of intent data.
Yeah, we see that with attribution all the time. If there's any mistrust, there's zero adoption. But speaking of attribution, do you see any customers successfully incorporating really strong intent signals into their attribution model?
Good question. So the use case would be a customer success organization renews a customer and they want to look back at intent data and see if they can correlate the two.
Sure. Or perhaps it's an expansion deal, or even, the specific thing I'm thinking is, let's say somebody's on G2 specifically researching the company. That's a pretty strong signal. I could even see it being used in net new, but just curious to see if you've seen that in the market.
Like specifically intent data in attribution, just in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're getting there. We have an insights platform that allows for it just through the lens of our data.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you won a deal, you can put that deal into our system and look backwards and see the intent journey. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
this attribution that says like, oh, good, Bombora saw that. They saw those two big spikes leading up to the buyer's process and all of that. So that's cool. But what I haven't seen, is the ability to put all of the temporal signals together in one soup.
We've
Uh,
done it. We've done it, and we use it. It's great. I highly recommend.
that sounds like the holy grail.
Yeah, no, it's been great for us. We have customers using Bombora and Caliber Mind, and it's been really interesting. So
Have you started to see folks want to use that as a validation tool before they buy data? Like, can you overlay it against a customer's closed won business and start to say, like, hey, if you had this data, this is what it would have told you, and this is how you could think about adopting it?
that's an interesting use case. We haven't really seen it from that perspective. So for the most part, we're engaging with people who already have the data and want to better incorporate it into their scoring and their attribution models, which we do. I haven't seen it as kind of a bake-off or purchasing use case, but I don't see why not. I think what we see customers struggling with the most is understanding which signals correlate the strongest to buying. So a lot of people just ingest everything.
Yep.
And that's where you pointed out salespeople start to mistrust it because we don't understand. Yeah. So I see the strongest use case being understanding what correlates to moving down the funnel and then incorporating that into the models.
Got it. And then those models typically then impact scoring, or do they become like lead scoring that would drive the behavior that way, or can they be used for just straight outbound prioritization as well?
Both. So we use it in, and I'm not trying to turn this into a commercial. It's just talking through like how you can actually put intent in place. So lead scoring, yes, but we have what's called a marketing qualified account that has strong buyer signals. So the account goes to the sales rep earlier, and we're seeing the sales cycle shortened by 4 to 6 weeks when we put that in place, which is pretty good. And then when it comes to, we actually do incorporate it into attribution, and that just helps solidify the argument to actually keep intent in place and the value of intent. So it really goes back to ROI, right?
Got it. And then I'm sure it's not just used to measure intent, the efficacy over the value of intent data.
Right.
So is it also measuring the efficacy and the value of marketing campaigns that they're running?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that the main thrust, and intent data is just kind of this nice other thing they can measure, or what's?
Well, okay, let me get on my soapbox for a minute. I believe that attribution is only effective if you're measuring activity from all spokes of the wheel, right? So if you're only looking at marketing data, sales is going to have a really hard time buying into it because they feel like they're not getting quote unquote credit for their activity. So I feel that it's really important to look at channel sales, marketing, and marketing includes all aspects of awareness, which includes intent. So I think it's really important that we're giving quote unquote credit where it's due. So we see what's being generated by cold prospecting versus who's already kind of got their antenna through intent and then sales interacts. Like it's really interesting to see. And I think this is the value of multi-touch attribution, is it's really interesting to see how many people are already actively looking before sales engages because of either marketing's activity or some other company's marketing activity, and they're just researching their options in the market.
Yep. No, that sounds great.
So Mike, thank you so much for joining us. How can people find you online?
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is awesome. And yeah, the best way is LinkedIn. That everyone makes fun of me because that's my only social media platform.
I don't blame you.
So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can always just send me an email, mburton@Bombora.
Great. Thank you so much. And for folks looking for more great content like this, check out calibermind.com.